Hello, and a very warm welcome to this wonderful church of St Peter Mancroft in the heart of Norwich. My name's Gill Persicke. I'm one of the lay ministers here, and I'm going to give today's little lunchtime reflection, which is on the subject of giving it all away. Because in the run-up to the general election tomorrow, I've been thinking a lot about poverty and wealth. And I'd like to tell you some stories about someone, a real person, who gave it all away. So just imagine it's a bitterly cold morning early in the year 1206, and we're in Italy, in Assisi, in the great hall of the bishop's palace. A wealthy young man called Francesco Bernardoni is there. He's in dispute with his father, and the bishop, poor chap, is trying to mediate between them. But during the course of these proceedings, the young man, Francis, does something absolutely extraordinary. He takes off all his clothes. He strips himself naked. He then gives his clothes and his purse back to his father, symbolically giving up all his family's wealth, which was considerable. And he stands there naked. The bishop, thank goodness, gives him a cloak to cover his nakedness, but Francis nonetheless leaves that hall barefoot and absolutely penniless. And he goes on to live the rest of his life voluntarily as the poorest of the poor, eating scraps, wearing rags, often sleeping rough. Francis, as you can tell, wasn't a sort of wishy-washy sort of bloke. He went for it. But what on earth drives someone to do this? Well, for Francis, it was a long story, as you can imagine. All sorts of stuff has gone on before that fateful morning in the bishop's palace. But today I want to look at the underlying reasons for what Francis did. And I think there are three. Number one, absolutely central, Francis had read his Bible. And he noted what Jesus says. If you're wealthy, it's virtually impossible to enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, not many people in the whole of Christian history have really taken this literally, but Francis did. He knew he needed to give it all away. And reason number two, Francis had been discovering that his wealth wasn't actually making him particularly happy. For example, he'd always been a great party animal. He spent enormous amounts on clothes and food and drink and entertainments, but these things had just lost their flavour. Indeed, as Francis's eyes opened to the horrible poverty around him, and it really was horrible in those days, extravagant living actually began to seem downright revolting to him. So, there are Francis's first two reasons, and I expect, to some extent at least, we can relate to them. We too are probably persuaded, in theory at least, that Jesus told the truth about wealth and poverty. It is simply wrong to be massively greedy, to indulge ourselves selfishly and let the rest of humanity go hang. No, both faith and common morality seem to call us towards poverty, to share what we have with other people. And we know it. We rarely act on it, but we do know it. And I expect also from time to time at least, we've all felt a bit sickened by conspicuous consumption. So, thus far, we can probably understand to some extent where Francis was coming from. But now I come to his third reason for embracing poverty, and this is where things get really exciting. Because Francis fell in love with poverty. Indeed, he regarded Lady Poverty, as he called her, as his bride. Just catch the sort of romanticism, the passion, even the eroticism of that image, a bride. So Francis's poverty was never gloomy and pious and dowdy. No, his poverty was reckless and exhilarating. He discovered that having nothing and being a nobody absolutely filled him with joy. He discovered that giving up wine enabled him to taste water and to experience water as extraordinary. He discovered that walking round Umbria barefoot broke down every barrier between himself and nature. And that grew into an overwhelming mystical experience for him. But there was fun too. When there was cause for celebration, and when by chance good things happened to turn up, gifts and so forth, Francis really celebrated with the best of them. He ate and drank and made merry with the very best of them. Nothing pious about that. But best of all, he discovered that being a nobody actually brought him closer to everybody. He had nothing to lose anymore, and this liberated him to do pretty much anything. It enabled him to sit with lepers, washing their wounds, and to sit equally simply with bishops and popes, recalling them to Christ's gospel. Rather cheeky, you may think. In the year 1219, during the Fifth Crusade, Francis decided unilaterally to go and convert the Sultan of Egypt to Christianity. Great idea. And the story, and it may well be a story, but the story goes that he and another brother simply toddled across no man's land towards the Saracen lines, got captured, of course, and beaten up. But their scruffy simplicity convinced the Muslims that they were actually holy fools, touched by God. And eventually Francis did indeed find his way to the Sultan. The two men spent several days talking to each other. They seemed to have respected and liked each other. Francis failed, of course he did. The Sultan remained Muslim, and peace did not suddenly break out. But the simplicity of his approach still inspires some peacemakers to this day. Saints, of course, can be infuriating to live with, and Francis was no exception. He started his career by taking a very relaxed sort of attitude to his own father's property. He simply sold some of his dad's stuff without permission to raise money to repair a church. And his poor companions must have realised very early on that it was fatal to lend Francis anything, because by the end of the day, he would quite simply have given it away to someone else. I love that. It amuses me, but there is radical redistribution of wealth here. If someone else needs it more than you do, just give it away. I find all this very interesting, but also challenging. I enjoy new shoes as much as the next girl. I sometimes lay awake at night fretting about bills. I don't like to be thought a fool, holy or otherwise, and my charitable giving is sensibly calculated rather than reckless. It's a sorry catalogue of failure. But hey, I'm not the only one. Even in his own lifetime, Francis had to watch his followers, the early Franciscans, changing his rules to make their own lives more comfortable and more secure. And when Francis died, some of those followers built a most preposterously lavish and inappropriate basilica over the little man's tomb. And in the centuries which followed, Franciscans took their place among the intellectual elite of Europe, playing power games as well as the next man. Franciscans and people in general just don't seem to get the idea of simplicity, of poverty. In fact, we all seem hardwired to pursue the exact opposite. So, where does this story, these thoughts, take me a couple of days before an election? Well, they remind me, of course, of the very real poverty around us in this very city. Children actually going hungry, for heaven's sake. People unable to pay their rent and so forth. These people do not need to be challenged by tales of St. Francis, but perhaps others of us do. Why do the politicians need to reassure people who are not actually in need that they won't be asked to pay a little more tax so that life can be better for everyone? Where's the goodness, where's the passion and the vision in that? Francis had the goodness, he had the passion and the vision in spades, and his life was both a challenge and an inspiration to the rich of his day. I wish I could get today's world to look again at this humble, infuriating, saintly man. Thank you for joining me today, and I wish you every blessing for the rest of the day.